Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Joanna Fitzwilson and I work on the Scottish Home Renewables team here at the Energy Saving Trust. Today's webinar is going to focus on tenement properties, and this webinar is part of a series that we're delivering this year, and that work's funded by the Scottish Government, which is part of their support for home renewables and energy efficiency, and that's there to help lower Scottish householders' energy bills, meet climate change targets and build a lower carbon economy. So before we get started, just a couple of points that you should know about in case you haven't attended a webinar with us before. First is that you can hear us, but we can't hear you. That's perfectly normal. Second, if you look to the right of your screen, you should see a control panel. You can type questions there if you have any that come up during the webinar. We'll be able to see them, but other listeners won't be. Also, if there's any issues, like if you have a problem with sound or your screen's frozen or anything like that, you can let us know there. We're also recording the webinar. We'll send you a link to it so you can listen to it later too. And finally, we're expecting the webinar to last approximately 45 minutes, but it is live, so we'll see how that goes. So if we just take a little look at today's agenda. First up, we're going to chat to Tom, who is an owner of a sandstone tenement that he completely renovated. So we'll find a bit more about what he did to make it a bit more energy efficient and how that work's gone. Then we've got Dr. Moses Jenkins from Historic Environment Scotland, who's going to talk about insulating and protecting older buildings, such as tenements. And then finally, I'll briefly cover some of the advice and support that Energy Saving Trust offers through Home Energy Scotland and our website as well. And then finally, at the end, if we've got some time and there's any questions we can answer, we can look at them too. So first, I'm just going to start things off by bringing Tom onto the line, hopefully.
Joanna.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
Joanna.
Hi. Thanks very much
Thank
for joining us. So it was really good of you. So you've renovated your flat, and you kindly sent us a little summary of the renovations along with some images. So we're just going to have a little chat about to see what you've done to renovate your tenement. So you live in it's a sandstone tenement in the city centre, and am I right in thinking that you bought it with intention to renovate as a project?
Yes. So it's in Edinburgh, in the Abbey Hill area, on the edge of Arthur's Seat. So we have a lovely view, but inside the property, yes, it is. Inside the property, when we bought it, it was pretty much probably how it had been in the 1970s. So it did have some central heating, but not throughout, and it really did need a full modernisation.
Yeah. So the aim of your renovations were to reduce heat loss and improve the efficiency of the property. But what were your motivations for a renovation project? Was that something you were really interested in doing, or was it the particular area you wanted to live in? Or
I think it was nice to be able to take an old tenement building and kind of put our own mark on it, really, and in doing, decorating it and making it like how we want it. But at the same time, we knew we could just really improve the fabric of the property, which has the added benefit of adding value to it. Makes it more comfortable to live in as well, really.
Yeah, especially with winter coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
And was environmental impact, was that a factor as well, or was that just a happy accident with the improving energy efficiency?
I wouldn't say an accident. I mean, it was one of the goals, not the main goal, but it would have been an absolute shame if we'd done all this work and then kind of neglected to make sure that the flat was going to have a lower environmental impact. And going back to what I said before, by doing most of these measures, it's going to make it a much nicer home to live in. Cozier, warmer, and whatnot. So yeah, it was definitely one of the key objectives.
So I've got some photos of some of the work that you've done, so we can talk through them as well. But could you just tell us a little bit about what you actually did to the property?
Yeah, so
what changes you made?
Just to give some scale to it, it was a 2-bedroom tenement flat on the first floor. And as I say, it really was in kind of a 1970s state. So we got various kind of tradesmen in to come talk about the ideas we had, and straight away we realised that the layout just wasn't really going to be appropriate for the way we wanted to live in it. It had one of a very tiny galley kitchen. So we talked to some structural engineers, and we ended up taking out a major wall
Yeah, I think
to
I've actually
open
got
up the kitchen
that.
area. Yeah, so I think there's
Yeah,
a photo of that taking place.
yeah. So is that
There we go.
the wall there? Yeah, it looks quite extensive
Yeah,
work.
yeah. So that was a tiny little kitchen that only had a gas pipe there before, and we managed to open it up onto a nice lounge area with a window that looks out onto Arthur's Seat. Um, what was kind of going down that path though, we realised this was quite a big chunk of work that needed to be done. It was actually done over about 8 days. The builders came in, put the structural steel in, and as we progressed down that route, we realised there were other improvements we wanted to make around the property at the same time. So in the other photos, you can see these are the surrounding walls for the main lounge.
Hmm.
And when we moved in, they'd actually been freshly painted, which is a bit of a shame because we were taking the fresh paint down. But what the previous owners had just painted over many layers of old paints and old wallpaper, which was pretty much covering up old horsehair plaster that was heavily cracked.
Oh, right.
So
Okay.
this plaster was about 3 inches thick and kind of coating the laths that you can see on the top right
Yeah.
photo there. So we got on with the unenviable job of removing that horsehair plaster. There's a lot of dust involved, so if anybody does get involved in that, then really think about your dust management and blocking off doorways and whatnot with plastic to stop it getting out into other rooms.
Yeah,
But
because you had to do the whole house as well. So that's did you do
yeah,
it room by room
absolutely.
or?
We did do it room by room. We did a lot of it ourselves, and there's tradesmen that will come in and do it for you. But we wanted to get stuck in,
Yeah.
partly for saving money, but also we were learning how to do these things as we go.
Yeah.
So we took off. Go on, sorry.
So I was just going to say, I've just got to move on to another photo here because you can see where you've
Yeah,
exposed all
there
of
we
the
go.
stonework and stuff. And there's also an after photo to show the fruits of your hard
Yeah.
work.
So once we'd pulled it all down, we managed to then
Yeah.
put up some new internal framework there, which we attached the new plasterboard onto. And you can see the insulation that we put in there. So we put that insulation on all the external walls to the property, especially the fact that we're on the edge of the park. We were exposed to a lot of kind of the winter weather and the wind and whatnot. So there's a lot of heat drain from that side of the gable end side.
Yeah, so you don't have the other buildings to sort of shelter you or anything like that on that
No,
side.
not at all,
Right.
not at
Mm.
all. So
Yeah,
that
good
that
to
that
use.
really helped, and we also got to put up the other benefits. So doing this, we got to put up, I think it was the blue plasterboard, which is the extra dense one, which actually helps with noise insulation as well.
Oh,
So
right. Okay.
there's the added benefit of noise reduction kind of from the flats above, just, footsteps and whatnot.
Yeah. And how did you go about choosing your insulation? Was that something your installer advised on, or did you have some ideas about that and beforehand?
Yeah, we had one of the home visits from that I organised through Energy Saving Trust, I think Home Energy Scotland, and they came out
Yeah.
and talked through some of the options we had. We looked at the current EPC I had. I think we'll come on to that in a little while. And we talked about what, if I made certain improvements, how I could improve the energy rating of the property,
Hmm.
what thickness of insulation would be required. And then the insulation you see in the photo there is
Yeah.
the wool insulation, glass wool, and that was just purchased from the local builders merchant. So relatively, I actually just popped down there myself and stuck a couple of rolls in the back of my car, so relatively easy to do.
All right. So that's also another sort of cost-saving way to do it, I suppose. You also had a look at not just like the walls and ceiling, etc., but also your windows as well. So we've got
Yeah,
some before, sort of taking that as before and after photos there, plus your plus shutters as well. So I mean that's quite a common complaint in sort of older properties like tenements that they quite often can't have single glazing or drafty windows. Was that a bit of an issue?
Yeah, it definitely was. Some of the windows had been modernised to UPVC ones, double glazed, but
Yeah.
not all of them. So the one on the left there was the kitchen window, and
Mhm.
it was, whilst it was probably originally a lovely window, it was in a bit of a state of disrepair, and we just didn't want to leave. Firstly, it's sightly to leave that in, but also again, uh, so much heat drain from it. So we put some new windows in, double glazed, and then we also added shutters, which was really nice to be able to do. The property never actually had original shutters; it had these faux panels that a lot of Edinburgh tenements have.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it looks like there might be shutters there, but not really. So we were able to take that side panelling off, and there was actually enough space to install new shutters, which is what you can see on the far right there.
Yeah, no, they look really nice. And do you find that makes a big difference to drafts and such, or
Massive. Yeah, I
yeah,
think that's one of the biggest differences. Well,
yeah,
apart from having double glazed windows, it was massive
mhm,
difference. And actually, just a few weeks ago, when we were getting the first cold weather,
yeah.
we noticed actual condensation on the outside of our windows, which
All
we
right.
were a bit shocked by. It was a bit, we've never seen that before. And then we did a bit of web research, and apparently, the most high performing double glazing, and especially when you use shutters, it's actually quite common to get the condensation on the outside of your window. So it
All
actually
right.
told us that they're doing a really good job because we hadn't seen
Yeah.
that in years before.
No, that's really good. And
And that just to say that condensation is only in the early mornings, and it kind of disappears as the sun comes up really and puts some
mhm,
heat on it.
yeah. And so these are quite big measures, obviously, with you sort of redid your walls and insulated and changing windows. Did you need planning permission for anything like that? Because that's often seen as quite a big hurdle to renovation projects.
No, there was no planning permission required for any of these changes.
Mhm,
Um, Not for our property, at least. I'm sure if you live in certain areas of certain cities, maybe in Edinburgh, if you're in a listed building, there might be other requirements, but
mhm,
not for the tenement we had in the city centre.
yeah.
Because we were doing structural work, we did have to get a building warrant, but that was because we were changing the floor plan. That wasn't really linked to the fact that we were doing this other work, like the insulation of the
Right.
windows.
So because you were doing things like affecting load-bearing walls, etc., you needed to have a building warrant for
Yeah,
things like
yeah.
that. Yeah. You
One
also
one other I was just going to say one other
sorry.
thing that actually made a big difference that's not kind of noted in these photos here is we noticed when we were taking some of the wood paneling away to install the shutters that some of the pointing of the actual stonework had kind of deteriorated over the years, and there are actual kind of gaps where you could see all the way through to the outside
All
in
right.
our actual wall. And I'm really glad we caught those because one, heat loss, but two, what we all know, it rains in Scotland, and that rain over time will just make its way into your building. So it was also good to be able to fill those gaps up with the right concrete ready mix, and then do some basic repointing on the outside.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a really thorough project, and like you've maybe saved yourself a bit of time and effort later on down the line as well. Um,
Mm.
in addition to this, you also installed some other measures looking at sort of energy efficiency. Can you talk us through any of the photos here? We've got a new heating system, for example.
Yes, so we put a new boiler in
Mhm,
and also upgraded the radiators throughout the flat at the same time. So that was kind of all done as one job with new pipe work. So because we'd stripped the walls and we just had the floorboards down, we were able to lay new pipe work. Some of it was actually old lead pipe work, so that was
oh,
another
right.
great benefit. Was really motivated by getting the lead out.
Yeah, you saved yourself
And
quite a few potential problems here, haven't you?
yeah, definitely. And also, it was nice to be able to make the route between the boiler and the bathroom and the kitchen taps much more efficient. Because the previous route that the pipes took, because it was the much older pipe work when the flat was used in a different way, the pipe routing was going all over the flat before it arrived at the hot water tank. So it would take a lot longer for the hot water to arrive in the bathroom.
Mhm.
So we're able to deal with that, and then we managed to get a loan through the Energy Saving Trust to cover the initial outlay for the boiler on an interest-free loan over a number of years.
Okay.
That was the heat scheme that I don't know if that's running anymore, but that was very helpful at the time.
Yeah, no, the scheme's not running at the moment, but we've got replacement schemes. I'll talk a bit about financial support, but later on. But that's great that you were able to get support for things like that. And you've also installed LED lighting, and is it smart controls you've got too?
Yeah, so probably at first I went a little overboard with the number of LEDs in the lounge. I had quite a few people come in and say, "You're trying to do open heart surgery in here." We removed a few of them,
Yeah.
but we took out the old just the old cable lights, and we put some LED dimmable lights across the lounge. So they're really low energy usage, so you can actually put quite a few in, and it doesn't even make a dent on compared to the alternatives. And really good quality of light. And then the smart thermostat is just, it looks fancy stuck on the wall there, but it's just got a cable going through to a plug on the other side. And it connects up to the boiler. So if you look at the boiler there on the bottom right-hand side, there's a little panel, and the thermostat is talking to that little panel through our Wi-Fi connection.
Okay.
And it's a learning thermostat, so we've actually got applications on our phone, so it knows when we're not at home and can turn off. When we're heading home, it kind of knows that we're on the way home, and it'll turn itself on and heat the flat up.
Oh, that sounds
And it
brilliant.
also, because it talks to the internet, it knows what the weather forecast for the day is and can kind of modulate the temperature in the flat accordingly with the temperature outside.
Right. Oh, that's yeah, that sounds really useful. So I've just got a little summary here of the work you did, because obviously you had a very thorough renovation project. So you've got, all of your insulation to reduce heat loss, and you've also improved energy efficiency in, quite a number of ways, from lighting to your heating system to your smart controls. So I just thought it'd be nice to finish on this slide, which shows your before and after energy performance certificate ratings. So for any listeners not aware, every property's got a energy performance rating between A and G, A being the best and G being the worst. And you can see that before you renovated, you had an EPC rating of C, and following renovation, you've now got quite a high B rating, which for a tenement in Edinburgh is actually really impressive. You must be quite pleased with that.
Yeah, no, I am. Thank you. It was nice to be able to achieve that actually, and we were renting out the flat earlier this year for a little while we were travelling abroad, and our tenant actually reported back to us how warm and cosy it was compared to other flats she stayed in Edinburgh before. So it was nice to be able to that was almost when we were looking to rent the flat temporarily. It was a marketing bit to be able to say, it's going to be warm and your energy bills are going to be lower.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think if you get praise when you're renting a property out, that's high praise indeed, isn't it? And you can see in the right that you've improved both energy efficiency and the environmental rating of practically everything in your property. And I noticed as well, it seemed to say in your previous EPC that if you made improvements, your potential rating could be 80, and you've improved it to 81. So that's well
I
done.
think I went for a thicker level of insulation there.
Yeah. So just to finish on sort of a final question, is one, well, two questions really. Is one, are you happy with the design of your house now? And also, is there anything that you would have done differently, or would recommend people do differently if you were to do it again?
I think with hindsight, I would have planned it out a little better. It was the first time that we were renovating, and so it was kind of a journey of discovery for us in terms of it. So a lot of these measures I talked about, we didn't sit down from day one and say we're doing this and we're going to do that and kind of plan it out. We kind of did these measures as we became aware that we could. So it's great if people take the time to kind of think these things through and plan it out, and it can be done relatively cheaply actually if you take the time to just go to your local builders merchant and ask them about the products they have and whatnot, and doesn't always have to be done through a tradesman.
No, that sounds really good. So, listen, thank you very much for speaking with us, Tom. I know that you can't stay on the rest of the webinar with us just now, but thanks again for speaking with us. It's been really useful to hear from somebody that's actually been through a renovation and survived and quite happy with the end result. So thanks very much, and we'll speak soon.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. And now I'm just going to pass over to Moses Jenkins to talk about a little bit more detail.
Okay, right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my part of the webinar where I'm going to discuss the results of technical research that we've done at Historic Environment Scotland into making older buildings energy efficient. Now, before we start to think about walls or floors or windows or any building element that we want to improve, we must first take a step back and think about why traditionally constructed buildings need a different approach when it comes to energy efficiency. Essentially, that's because of the way that these buildings deal with moisture. So within a traditional building, moisture from the air, from the internal environment that we produce by having baths and drying clothes and boiling potatoes and that kind of thing, moisture from the internal environment can enter into the fabric of the building. So the stone of the walls, lime mortar, lime plaster, floor timbers, roof timbers, that sort of thing. All of these building elements within a traditional building can take in moisture and it can then diffuse back out again. So when we're looking to improve energy efficiency of traditional buildings, we need to have this moisture movement dynamic very much in our heads. There's lots of sources of moisture within buildings. So internally, I've mentioned a few: drying clothes, breathing, showers, baths, that sort of thing. And externally, of course, we have the rain as a source of moisture. So our traditional built environment needs to deal with a lot of moisture, and we need to maintain that movement of moisture if we're going to upgrade the thermal performance of a building successfully. The other thing that we must remember with a traditionally constructed building is the movement of air. Now, essentially within a traditional building, we have a setup whereby air can enter into the building, usually via subfloor vents. It can travel throughout the building, and it can then, once it's gathered up all the warm, moist air of habitation, it can then dissipate out, generally through the roof space. Yes, we can reduce drafts. Yes, we can improve energy efficiency, but we must not do that at the expense of ventilation. And this is the reason why we must be at all times aware of the movement of moisture and the movement of air. If we are not aware of these dynamics, then we run the risk of condensation forming, both on the surface of building elements and within building elements themselves. And that moisture can feed mold growth, it can feed timber decay, it can affect stonework. So we do need to be aware of moisture and ventilation at all times. Now, if we then move on to consider how we improve energy efficiency within traditional buildings, if we think firstly about wall insulation, and more specifically internal wall insulation, we've looked at three ways of insulating a traditional mass masonry wall internally. We've looked at putting a material in behind an existing wall lining. We've looked at applying a material directly onto the masonry with no gap. And we've looked at building a frame off the wall and putting in an insulating material that way. Now, if we take each in turn, I'll talk a lot in the next sort of 10-15 minutes about U values. A U value is simply a way of expressing how much heat passes from the inside of a building through that building element to the outside world. And the higher the U value, the more heat is lost through that building element. Now, a mass masonry wall in Scotland will generally have a U value of about 1.2 or thereabouts. Now, if we're thinking about putting an insulating material in behind an existing wall lining, which could be lath and plaster, it could be plasterboard, we've looked at a few. We've looked at this stuff, bonded polystyrene bead. You'll see we achieved a U value of 0.31 with that. A few caveats with this. You'll need to put electrical wiring in a conduit if you're going to install this, and you'll also have to stop up the gap at the skirting board level, otherwise the bead will disappear off into the void beneath the floor. Nevertheless, a U value achieved here of 0.31 is a pretty good thermal improvement. We've also looked at this stuff, open cell foam put in between an existing wall lining and a masonry wall. U value achieved here 0.4, so that was pretty good. Important to differentiate between open cell foam, which allows moisture to move, and closed cell foam, which restricts the free movement of moisture. If we think about putting a material directly hard up onto masonry, we've looked at this stuff, calcium silicate board. You can see there about a 50% improvement in thermal performance. Fairly easy to apply directly onto masonry. The sort of browny grey stuff that you can see there, that's the adhesive mortar, which sticks the panels, the insulating calcium silicate boards, onto the wall. And that's then finished with 2 coats of plaster. We've also looked at this stuff, Aerogel blanket. That's a stairwell in a tenement in Rothesay. You can see there 1.3 down to 0.6 in terms of thermal improvement. Aerogel is an interesting material. It allows moisture to move through it, so that's good from our point of view. It's very thin, it's only 10 mm in thickness, and it's applied directly onto masonry. It is expensive though, so you would really need to have a good reason to use this as opposed to some other materials, but it's very useful where you have a curved substrate, as we see here, and where there isn't much space. So a good material to know about. If we think now about building a frame off a wall and putting in a board-based material, we've installed this stuff, hemp fibre board, applied into a frame. That's then finished with plasterboard. Got the U value there to 0.21, which is pretty impressive. That's with 100 mil of insulation. And we've also looked at this wood fibre board insulation, 80 mil of which brought the U value of that wall down to 0.19, which is the biggest thermal improvement that we have seen. So there are significant potential improvements that can be made to mass masonry walls if we insulate internally. If we move now to think about external wall insulation, we've done a trial with this stuff, external wood fibre board insulation. That's a tenement in Glasgow. You can see it's finished with a 2-coat render system. We can see it better in that picture there. That material is applied directly to masonry and then finished with the render. Decent thermal improvement there, 1.3 down to 0.4, which is pretty good. So that's something we've looked at for EWI, external wall insulation. However, if you are thinking about external wall insulation for a traditional building, I would always encourage people to think very carefully about detailing issues. So gutters, downpipes, windowsills, copes, ventilation, services, all of that sort of thing. Think carefully about that, make sure it's being planned correctly, and crucially make sure that it is all included in the price of the job, because if it's not, it probably won't be done very well. If we think now briefly about windows, we've looked at quite a lot of improvement options for windows. Shutters were mentioned in the previous talk. Good to see some shutters being brought back into use. Existing options like blinds, shutters and curtains could give a very good level of thermal improvement to a single glazed window. Secondary glazing, likewise, we've measured quite a few systems and we've achieved a U value of 1.7 in the case of the windows that you can see there. So there is a lot that we can do to improve single glazed windows without removing them. And here we have a summary of all the interventions that we've made to windows. So you'll notice right up at the top that if you can have secondary glazing and close your shutters, then you can make a 75% improvement in the thermal performance of windows. This slide is taken from one of our technical papers, so if you want more details about this, I'd encourage you to read that. If we think about roof space improvements now, if you're insulating a loft, then we've used sheep's wool here. This is Edinburgh Castle, where we've got the U value down to 0.3. We did use a wood fibre board in a different building, which worked well, but it was a little bit more fiddly to install. But you'll see there we've got the U value down to 0.2 with that, which is pretty impressive. If you want to insulate a pitched roof, that's entirely possible as well. The slide that you can see with the blue part there, the blue part's the pitch of a roof, and we removed parts of the ceiling lining there, slid wood fibre board down into that gap, and we got the U value there improved from 1.6 to 0.8, which is pretty good. We were careful there though to leave a gap between the insulation and the sarking board of the roof to allow that to be ventilated. Ventilation is very important throughout traditional buildings. It is certainly very important within a roof space. Now, not to go into too many technicalities, but if you insulate a loft, then you make the sarking board onto which the slates are laid, you make that sarking board colder, and when a building element gets colder, the risk of condensation goes up. And as the risk of condensation goes up, if liquid moisture does form on a building element, the risk of mold growth becomes ever greater. So if you are insulating a roof space, please make sure that there is enough ventilation and that that is all working effectively. Just quickly a few words about floors. If you have a suspended timber floor and you can get underneath into what's referred to as a crawl space, then you can insulate between joists. You can also quite often insulate a suspended timber floor by lifting the floorboards up and insulating with timber runners and then maybe a wood fibre board between the joists and then reinstating the floorboards afterwards. So you can make pretty good improvements to a suspended timber floor. We can see there an example of that technique. So that's where the floorboards were lifted up. U value improvement there 2.4 to 0.7. If you have a solid floor, so it could be a concrete screed or it could be flagstones if it's an older building, that can be a bit more tricky to insulate. It can be a wee bit harder to improve. You can look at something like a lime concrete floor, but that's a very time-consuming process. You can potentially, if it's a concrete screed, put something down over the top, but you'll also then need to consider things like adjusting doors and that sort of thing. But there are good improvements that can be made to floors. Right, that's pretty much all I want to say for my part of the webinar. That was necessarily quite a quick run through what is quite a complex subject. I would say by way of summary, remember the importance of moisture movement and ventilation. If you are looking to make energy efficiency improvements, we can make traditional buildings more energy efficient, but we need to think carefully and act sensitively to the performance of the building as well as its aesthetic. If you want to know more, please go onto our website. There's lots of information for homeowners and more technical stuff for professionals as well. And also very happy for people to contact me if they have any queries. So thanks for listening, and I'll pass you back over to Joanna for the next part.
Thanks for that, Moses. That was really interesting, but more in depth as well. So I was just going to talk a little bit about the advice and financial support available through Energy Saving Trust and Home Energy Scotland. So we've got advice either through our Energy Saving Trust website, which has got lots of tools and information about different technologies and measures that you might be interested in. And we also have an advice network, which is known as Home Energy Scotland. And Home Energy Scotland is a network that's managed by Energy Saving Trust and funded by the Scottish Government. And we've got 5 advice centres across the country, and because it's funded by the Scottish Government, the advice they give is just free, independent and impartial. And having them in different parts of Scotland means that they can also give localised advice, because the advice you get and the support available to you might be dependent on your personal circumstances. It might also be dependent on the area you live in. The advice they give is on energy efficiency, renewables, transport, water, resources and waste. So it's quite a holistic service. And if you wanted to find out more, all you need to do is phone Home Energy Scotland on that 0808 number that's on the bottom of all the slides here. And it's free from landlines and most mobiles. And if you phone it, you'll be able to speak to the advice centre in your area. So as part of Home Energy Scotland, we also have specialist in-home advice. Each centre has specialists which can offer more tailored support, and that's available for owner-occupiers and private sector landlords. That coverage is also available all over Scotland, and they can give specialist advice over the phone, and in some instances it might also be appropriate for them to do a home visit where they would produce a tailored energy report for your property. This isn't the same as the Energy Performance Certificate as mentioned earlier. This is a Home Energy Scotland report, and it would look at your sort of scenarios that you could scenarios of measures that you could install and the sort of fuel bill and carbon savings that they would generate. Reports also explain some of the financial support that might be available to you, and it's just a good way of sort of tying everything up together and a service that can sort of help take you through the process. In terms of financial support, there may be more schemes available to you, and the best way to find out what is available to you is to phone Home Energy Scotland. But currently we do have the Home Energy Scotland loan, which is an interest-free loan funded by the Scottish Government, and that can help with the upfront costs of renewable measures, energy storage, and also energy efficiency improvements. So if you're looking at doing something, quite a big renovation project like we talked about earlier, this is sort of loan where you could tie all of that funding together. Or if you were just looking to install a single renewable system or energy efficiency improvement like a boiler, this is also a potential source of funding, and it helps cover the sort of upfront costs of systems. It's open to owner-occupiers and eligible private sector landlords, and the only way you could be able to get an application form is if you contact Home Energy Scotland, and that's partly just to make sure that you're aware of all the support that's available to you, because it says loan funding, so it would involve you repaying the funds, although it is interest-free. There's just a small admin fee if you were to be paid a loan. And you can find out a bit more about the loan at that web link at the bottom there. It's got a bit more information if you were looking into funding for a certain measure. And on this slide, just got a bit more about the sort of funding that's available. So this is just energy efficiency measures here. So for energy efficiency, we also offer cashback as well. Cashback is available for a limited time. It's subject to availability. In fact, all of the loan funding is subject to availability. It just gives you an idea of the sort of maximum values that are available, and that's up to 100% of the cost of the measure. So for example, if your solid wall insulation only cost £9,000, the maximum funding available to you would be £9,000, and then your cashback would be calculated accordingly as well. So in addition to financial support, we also have quite a few online tools and resources on the website as well. I won't talk through all of them, but one tool we do have is it's a bit more unique, is our Green Homes network, and that's a network of householders in Scotland that have actually installed energy efficiency or renewable measures in their properties. So it's a big database of case studies that you can search by area, property type. You can also look at, specific improvements that you might want to make and see who else has made improvements, and you can read more about what they've done. And in some instances, you may also be able to arrange a visit or to speak with the householder to find out a bit more about what they've done. So this network covers not just tenement properties like we're talking about today, but also eco builds and historic buildings, cottages, just about anything tower blocks, etc. And you can find out more about that at the link at the bottom of the slide here. We've also got other tools as well that look at things like, solar energy, or, what renewable technologies might be suitable for your home, just to give a sort of idea if you're looking to research something before you speak to Home Energy Scotland, or perhaps afterwards. So I should note here that all of this advice and support isn't just available to people with tenement properties, it's available to all householders in Scotland. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all of the support available to householders in Scotland. To find out more, I really would recommend phoning Home Energy Scotland on that 0808 number to find out more about what might be available to you, because, like I say, it might be dependent on your personal circumstances and where you live as well. So I know that my colleague's been looking at your questions throughout the webinar, and in some cases I think he's actually answered some already to people directly, but there's been specific ones. Just going to have a little look. Yeah, there was one question about cashback. Someone's asked about if cashback's also available for renewable measures. The answer to that is no, cashback is only available for energy efficiency, and the reason for that is because we know there's other funding available for renewable technologies, such as the domestic renewable heat incentive and the feed-in tariff schemes. In the case of the feed-in tariff, if you were to receive grant funding, you may not be able to apply for the feed-in tariff at all, and for the renewable heat incentive it would just be deducted from your final payments. So we don't actually offer cashback for those measures. And I think we've also got a question here for Moses as well. We've been asked, would insulating a suspended floor in a tenement building be appropriate if you live above the ground floor, as you'd effectively be insulating the heat coming from flats below? What do you think?
Generally, we wouldn't look at insulating intermediate floors, either within a building that was just one big whole building, or within a tenement. If you've got a sort of upper story flat, there's other things I'd look at. Secondary glazing perhaps would be something to look at, maybe wall insulation. But no, I wouldn't necessarily look at insulating a floor in that case. It's also worth remembering that very often within tenement construction there was what was called deafening or pugging within the floor of intermediate, within suspended timber floors of intermediate stories, and that will be providing both acoustic benefit and also an element of insulation. So I suppose the short answer is no, I probably wouldn't look at that as a measure in the first instance.
Okay, thanks, Moses. So I think that's us just about on time now. If you do have any questions that occur to you following the webinar, I would recommend phoning Home Energy Scotland. It's a really good first port of call. And you can find out a bit more about renewables, etc. at that link there. Keep up to date on what we're doing. So I think we'll just leave it there, and it's just for me to thank Moses and Tom. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for listening. Thanks.